Hey everyone, welcome to Daily Train My Brain. I'm here to guide you today. I know many of you watch this video to help you fall asleep, so before you drift off, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Now, get comfortable and relax as we dive into tonight's story. The mansion loomed ahead of me, an imposing structure of stone and shadows, bathed in the last light of dusk. As I fumbled with the keys, a cold shiver ran down my spine, though it had nothing to do with the brisk autumn air. I tried to shake off the feeling after all. It's not every day you're asked to house sit an estate that looks like it's straight out of a Gothic novel. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound echoing through the vast entryway. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely a whisper in the silence. The only response was the steady tick of an antique grandfather clock. "Get it together, Sarah," I muttered to myself. "You're alone here, just like Mrs. Blackwood said. There's nothing to be afraid of." I dragged my suitcase up the grand staircase, my footsteps swallowed by the thick carpet. The bedroom Mrs. Blackwood had pointed me to was massive, easily bigger than my entire apartment, with a four-poster bed large enough for 4 people. I unpacked quickly, eager to explore the rest of the house before darkness fully settled in. One room after another revealed itself, each more luxurious than the last. There was a library with shelves of books that reached the ceiling, a music room with a dusty grand piano, and a sunroom brimming with exotic plants I couldn't even name. It felt like stepping into a forgotten world of wealth and faded grandeur. As nightfall approached, I made my way to the kitchen to prepare some dinner. The sleek, modern appliances seemed out of place against the vintage decor, a jarring reminder that I was still in the present. I ate my meal in silence, the sound of my fork scraping against the plate louder than I expected. That first night was restless. The house creaked and groaned with every shift, settling in ways that made me sit up straight in bed, heart racing. Each noise sent me into a panic, only for me to remember where I was. By dawn, I was more tired than when I had gone to sleep. The next day passed quietly. I worked remotely from the library, surprisingly good Wi-Fi for such an old house. As evening drew near, I decided to unwind with a bath in the clawfoot tub, hoping it would help me relax. But just as I was settling into the warm water, I heard it a thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My heart froze. I listened closely, straining to hear more. There it was again, slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was trying to be quiet. "It's just the house settling," I whispered to myself. Or maybe it's just your imagination. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. With trembling hands, I quickly got out of the tub and threw on some clothes. I crept toward the bathroom door, pressing my ear against it. The footsteps had stopped, but now I could hear something else, drawers opening and closing. I was searching the house. My phone was in the bedroom, and the landline was downstairs. I was trapped. Think, Sarah, think. I scanned the bathroom for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on a heavy crystal soap dish. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Taking a deep breath, I carefully opened the bathroom door. The hallway was empty, but I could still hear movement from one of the spare rooms. I moved stealthily toward the stairs, but just as I reached the top, a floorboard creaked beneath my foot. The sounds from the room below stopped instantly. My heart pounded as I bolted down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. I could hear heavy footsteps chasing me, growing louder with each passing second. I reached for the front door only to find it locked. In my panic, I couldn't remember which key was which. A hand suddenly grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. In the split second before I could react, I swung the soap dish blindly, feeling the tension and fear overwhelm me. I felt the soap dish make contact with something solid. There was a grunt of pain, and the grip on my shoulder loosened. I didn't wait to find out who I had hit. I turned and bolted toward the kitchen, making a beeline for the back door. Behind me, the intruder's footsteps were growing closer, their hurried pace sending a fresh wave of panic through me. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the microwave clock. I fumbled through the darkness, hands outstretched, desperate to find the door. My hips slammed into the kitchen island, and I bit back a cry of pain. Where was the damn door? I felt around until my fingers brushed against cool glass. The door. I struggled with the handle, my sweaty palms slipping on the smooth metal. Finally, it clicked open, and I rushed outside into the crisp night air. The vast, manicured lawn stretched out before me, and beyond it, the trees loomed like a dark, impenetrable wall. I ran toward them, the wet grass soaking through my socks. I had just reached the tree line when I heard the back door open with a loud creak. Stop. A deep voice bellowed, echoing through the night. That sound only pushed me faster, urging me deeper into the woods. The branches whipped at my face, and the tangled roots threatened to trip me with every step. I had no plan, no destination in mind, just one goal. Get away, get help. I had no idea how long I ran. Minutes? Hours? My lungs screamed for air. My legs felt like lead, but fear drove me forward, making my every step feel like a race against something terrible. Finally, when I thought I couldn't take another step, I saw lights through the trees. A house. I stumbled toward it, dizzy from the rush of relief. As I broke through the tree line, I stopped dead in my tracks. It was the mansion. Somehow, in my panic, I had run in a circle. For a moment, I froze, unsure of what to do. But then I saw it a police car in the driveway, one that hadn't been there before. Safety. I ran toward it, waving my arms. Please help, I screamed. The front door of the mansion opened, and a police officer stepped out, followed by Mrs. Blackwood. God, Mrs. Blackwood exclaimed, rushing toward me. Sarah, dear, are you all right? We've been so worried. I stared at her, breathless and confused. There's someone in the house. I managed to gasp. An intruder. He chased me. Mrs. Blackwood and the officer exchanged a glance. Sarah, Mrs. Blackwood said gently, there's no intruder. It's just Harold. Just as she spoke his name, a man appeared in the doorway. He was tall, lean, with graying hair and a kind face. A bruise was already forming on his cheek. I'm so sorry I frightened you, he said, his voice deep and full of regret, the same voice I had heard shouting at me in the woods. I should have announced myself, he continued. Sarah, this is my husband Harold, Mrs. Blackwood explained. He wasn't supposed to be back until next week, but his business trip ended early. He came home to surprise me, not realizing I had asked you to house sit, and that had kept me moving suddenly drained away, leaving me feeling exhausted and deflated. But the noises, I stammered. The searching. Harold looked sheepish. I was looking for my reading glasses, he explained. I didn't want to wake you, so I tried to be quiet. When I heard you run, he gestured to his bruised cheek. You have quite an arm. My face burned with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, I muttered. I thought I didn't know. No, it's my fault, Harold insisted. I should have called ahead, or at least turned on some lights. Mrs. Blackwood put a comforting arm around my shoulders. Come inside, dear. You're shaking like a leaf. Let's get you warmed up, and we'll sort this out. As we walked back to the house, the officer trailing behind us, I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. All that terror, all that running, and it had all been a misunderstanding. But later that night, as I lay in bed, listening to the Blackwoods move about the house. A small part of me wondered, what if it hadn't been Harold? What if it had been a real intruder? I pulled the covers up tighter, suddenly aware of how big and quiet the house felt around me. The mansion felt empty, and the isolation was overwhelming. There were so many corners and rooms where someone or something could be hiding. Sleep was a long time coming that night. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the thick canopy above, I realized just how lost I truly was. What was meant to be a refreshing solo hike in the Cascade Mountains had turned into a nightmare, and I was about to stumble into something far darker than I could have ever imagined. I had always taken pride in my skills as an outdoorsman. Growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I spent more time in the woods than I did in my own yard. But standing there now, my boots sinking slightly into the wet earth, I felt a deep unease that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. The trail I had been following for the past 2 days was becoming less and less visible, and eventually it disappeared altogether. I pushed on, relying on my ability to navigate by the sun and my trusted compass, but with every step, the towering pines and jagged rocks around me began to blur into one indistinguishable scene. Panic began to stir in my chest. "Stay calm, Jake," I whispered to myself. Panic is the enemy. I decided to climb higher, hoping that from the top of the ridge, I might spot a landmark or even the distant outline of a highway. The climb was brutal. My muscles burned with each step, and my water supply was dwindling. I wasn't sure when I'd next find a stream. But when I reached the top, I heard something that froze me in my tracks. Voices. Human voices. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over me. Other hikers. Maybe they could help me find my way. I quickened my pace, ignoring the ache in my legs. But as I got closer, my relief turned to unease. The voices weren't filled with the joy of fellow hikers. Instead, they were low, angry, and punctuated by the sharp clink of metal. I slowed down, moving silently, relying on the skills my father had taught me over the years. I crouched behind a large boulder, peeking around it cautiously. What I saw made my blood run cold. In a small clearing about 50 yards away, 3 men were gathered. Their appearance was rough, unkempt beards, dirty clothes, but it wasn't their looks that set me on edge. It was what they were doing. They were setting up what looked like a makeshift lab. Plastic containers, tubes, and propane tanks were scattered around them. One man was carefully measuring a white powder, while another stirred a bubbling pot over a small stove. I didn't need to be an expert to know what I was seeing. This was a meth lab, hidden deep in the wilderness where no one would ever find it except me. I held my breath, not daring to make a sound. These men were dangerous, I could tell. If they saw me, there was no way they would let me walk away unharmed. "Damn it, Tony!" one of the men suddenly shouted, making me flinch. "I told you to watch the temperature. You're ruining the whole batch." "Screw you, Mike," the man stirring the pot retorted, not looking up. "I know what I'm doing. Both of you, shut up." He was clearly the leader. "We don't need any noise. Last thing we need is a ranger stumbling upon us." Only they knew how close they were to the truth. I knew I had to get out of there. Fast. But which direction? I was already lost, and now I had to avoid these criminals too. One wrong step, one snapped twig, and I could be discovered. I started to slowly and carefully back away from my hiding spot, my heart hammering so loudly that I was sure they could hear it. But as I took another step, a branch cracked beneath my foot. The sound was deafening in the quiet forest. I froze, every muscle tensed. What was that? One of the men asked sharply. "Probably just a deer," another man replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Go check it out," the leader ordered. The possibility that it could be a bear, drawn by the scent, crossed my mind. Then I heard its footsteps moving toward me. Panic surged, and without thinking, I bolted. Quiet no longer mattered. All that was important was getting as far away from those men as possible. Behind me, their shouts echoed they'd spotted me. I ran harder than I ever had before, crashing through dense brush, hurtling over fallen logs. Branches lashed at my face, leaving sharp stings, but I didn't slow down. The sounds of their pursuit-heavy footsteps, angry calls pushed me on. I had no plan, no direction, just the instinct to keep moving, to escape. My lungs burned with each breath. My legs screamed in pain, but the fear kept me going. Then, without warning, the ground dropped away beneath me. I had run right off the edge of a steep incline. The world spun as I tumbled down the slope, a chaotic blur of earth and sky. When I hit the bottom, I lay there for a moment, stunned, gasping for air. Then, the voices came again, closer this time. Ignoring the agony coursing through my body, I forced myself up and took off again. The forest closed in around me, the trees becoming a blur as I sprinted. I couldn't tell how long I'd been running, how far I'd gone. My throat was raw, my mouth dry, but I pushed on. Just as I thought I couldn't go another step, I burst from the trees and onto a road. A real paved road. Relief flooded me, but I wasn't safe yet. I could still hear the men in the distance, their pursuit not far behind. I scanned the road, desperate for a car, a truck, anything. But it was empty. With no other choice, I started running down the road, praying it would lead somewhere, anywhere with help. Time lost meaning as I pounded the pavement, my lungs on fire. Then, like a beacon in the night, I saw it at a gas station. I'd never been so happy to see those neon lights. I staggered into the parking lot, startling an elderly man who was filling up his truck. "Please," I gasped, my voice hoarse. "I need help. Call the police." The man took one look at me, wild-eyed, covered in cuts and bruises, and rushed inside. Moments later, he returned with the clerk, who was already speaking to 911. I collapsed onto the ground, my legs giving out, as I heard the clerk explain my condition to the dispatcher. The old man draped his jacket over me, murmuring reassuring words. It wasn't until the distant wail of sirens reached my ears that I finally allowed myself to breathe easier. I was safe. The rest of the night was a blur. Police reports, medical checks. I told them everything I had witnessed, and they assured me they would look into it. They found the lab abandoned, but with signs of recent use. Men, however, had disappeared into the wilderness. It took a long time before I felt comfortable in the woods again. The place that once felt like home, like a refuge, now felt like a nightmare. But over time, I found my way back. I still hike, still seek out the solitude of nature, but now I know no matter how remote a place may seem, you're never truly alone. And sometimes that's not a comforting thought. It was just another quiet night at Westfield Mall, or so I thought. Little did I know that within hours, I'd be fighting for my life against an invisible enemy in a place at once considered ordinary. My name is Mike, and I've worked as the night security guard at Westfield for 3 years. It's usually a pretty uneventful job. Patrol the halls, check the locks, make sure no one's trying to set up camp in the food court. It was just another routine night at Westfield Mall, or so I thought. I clocked in at 10 o'clock p.m., just as the last member of the cleaning crew, Janice, was heading out. She flashed me a smile as she grabbed her things. "Quiet night, Mike?" she asked, always cheerful. "See you tomorrow." If only she knew what was about to happen. I settled into the security office, a cramped room lined with monitors displaying footage from the mall's various cameras. I did a quick check. Empty hallways, closed stores, and dark corridors. Everything was calm. Around midnight, I started my first round. The mall was eerily silent, with only the echo of my footsteps on the cold, polished floor. Honestly, I'd never admit it to anyone, but those rounds always made me uneasy. The mannequins in the store windows, those blank, lifeless faces, always seemed to be watching me. As I passed the fountain in the atrium on the second floor, I heard it. A faint noise, like metal scraping against metal. I stopped, straining my ears. There it was again. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing unnaturally in the vast space. No response. I pulled out my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the dark stores. Nothing seemed out of place. "Must be the old pipes," I muttered, trying to calm my nerves. But even as I continued my rounds, my senses were on edge. Every shadow felt darker, every sound louder. By the time I returned to the security office, I was shaken. I slumped into my chair, my eyes scanning the monitors. Everything seemed normal, but something didn't feel right. That's when I saw a shadow moving quickly across one of the screens. I froze, my heart pounding. It was gone in an instant, leaving me wondering if I had imagined it. I rewound the footage, watching closely. There, in the corner of the screen, a figure darted by too quickly to make out clearly. My mouth went dry. Someone was in the mall. I grabbed my radio, ready to call for backup, but hesitated. What if I was just overreacting? I didn't want to be the guard who caused a commotion over nothing. I decided to investigate on my own. Armed with only my flashlight and a heavy wrench I kept in the office for emergencies, I stepped back into the mall. The atmosphere had changed. The corridors felt oppressive, as if every storefront was hiding something. Every shadow was a threat. I moved carefully, listening for any sign of movement. As I approached the electronics store, I heard it again, the scraping sound. It was louder now, coming from inside the store. I stepped closer, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The store's security gate was still up, but there was a gap at the bottom, just enough for someone to slip through. My heart raced, and I almost turned back. I should have called the police, but something pushed me forward, a mix of curiosity and a misplaced sense of duty. I ducked under the gate, wincing as it creaked. The store was pitch black, the rows of TVs and computers looming like silent sentinels. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness. "Security," I called, trying to sound confident. "Show yourself." Silence. Then a loud crash echoed from the back of the store. I spun around, shining my flashlight toward the sound. There was movement, someone was here. I crept deeper into the store, the wrench now gripped tightly in my sweating hand. Another crash, closer this time. Spun again, but there was nothing. Whoever was here was toying with me, playing a game of cat and mouse. Suddenly, the store lights flickered on. I blinked, momentarily blinded by the brightness. When my vision cleared, I saw them. 3 men dressed in black from head to toe, their faces hidden behind masks. They had me cornered. One held a crowbar, another a knife, and they were closing in. "Well," the man in the center said, his voice muffled by the mask, "looks like we've got ourselves a visitor, boys." I raised my wrench, trying to muster more confidence than I felt. "You're trespassing," I said, surprised by how steady my voice was. "Leave now, and I won't call the cops." They laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the dark store. "I don't think you understand the situation," the leader sneered. "We're not leaving, and neither are you." They started to move, spreading out to surround me. My heart raced as I backed away. I was outnumbered, and underarmed. There was no time to hesitate. I needed a plan. Fast. Then, my back hit a display stand, and an idea struck. I grabbed the nearest laptop and hurled it at the closest intruder. He ducked, giving me the distraction I needed. Without a second thought, I bolted. I darted between the aisles, knocking over displays to slow them down. I could hear them cursing and chasing after me. Reaching the security gate, I slid under it without slowing. My heart pounded as I ran through the mall, the sound of their pursuit growing closer. I had to reach the security office to call for help, but they were between me and the office. I veered sharply toward the service corridors. If I could lose them in the maze of hallways, maybe I'd have a chance. I slammed the door behind me, entering the dark, narrow passage. The emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows. I ran, taking random turns, hoping to confuse them. Left. Right. Another right. I quickly became lost in the labyrinth of corridors, but I could still hear their footsteps echoing behind me. I stumbled into the mall's basement, surrounded by towering machines, generators, systems, water heaters. The noise was deafening, drowning out their footsteps. I ducked behind a large boiler, trying to catch my breath and think. I needed a phone, but my radio was back at the security office, and my cell was locked in my locker. I was on my own. A noise to my left made me freeze. One of them was nearby, searching methodically. I could see the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the floor. I held my breath as it passed inches from me. For a moment, I thought he'd seen me, but the beam moved on. I waited until I couldn't hear him anymore. Then I started to move again. I had to get back upstairs to find a way out. Every nerve was on edge as I crept through the basement. I was almost to the stairs when I felt a hand grab my shoulder. I spun, swinging my wrench wildly. It hit something solid, and I heard a grunt of pain. I didn't wait to see who I'd struck. I ran up the stairs two at a time, bursting back into the main mall. I could hear their shouts getting louder. There were more of them now, and they were all after me. My legs burned, but I pushed myself faster than I'd ever run. My lungs were on fire as I rounded a corner and saw at the exit. Freedom. I slammed into the door, expecting it to swing open, but it didn't budge. Of course, it was locked. I had locked it myself at the start of my shift. Panic surged as I scrambled for my keys. I could hear them getting closer. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely get the key into the lock. Come on, I muttered, desperate. Finally, the lock clicked, and I yanked the door open. I bolted into the night, not daring to look back. I didn't stop running until I reached the 24-hour diner across the street. I burst in, gasping for air, startling the lone waitress. Call the police. I wheezed. The next few hours were a blur of police statements and questions. They searched the mall but found no sign of the intruders, only some broken displays in the electronics store and a crowbar left behind. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't bring myself to go back to that mall. Couldn't shake the feeling of being hunted. Sometimes, late at night, I wake up in a cold sweat, still hearing the sound of their footsteps chasing me. The sound of footsteps echoed in my ears, and I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't made it to that door in time. The crackling of our campfire barely made a dent in the eerie stillness that had settled over the forest. What had started as a relaxing getaway for me and Sarah was slowly turning into something far more sinister. As I stared into the inky darkness beyond the faint glow of our fire, the unsettling feeling that we were being watched crept over me. I had no idea that our peaceful camping trip was about to spiral into a fight for our lives. I'm Alex, and I've always had a deep love for the great outdoors. When I suggested to my girlfriend, Sarah, that we spend our anniversary weekend camping, she was immediately on board. We chose a remote spot in the Ozarks, far away from the usual tourist trails. We wanted solitude, a chance to reconnect with nature and with each other. Turns out, sometimes you get more than you bargain for. The first day was perfect. We hiked through lush forests, the sound of birds singing high above us. We set up our tent in a small clearing next to a gentle stream, the soothing sound of the water accompanying our easy conversation. As night descended, we sat by the campfire, roasting marshmallows and pointing out constellations in the clear, starry sky. But it was the second day when things started to feel off. We were exploring a nearby ridge when Sarah suddenly stopped in her tracks. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice tight with unease. I paused, listening, but heard nothing except the usual rustling of leaves and distant birds. "What did you hear?" I asked. "I thought I heard voices," she said, her eyes scanning the trees around us, like shouting. I strained to hear, but all was quiet. "Probably just other hikers," I said, trying to reassure her, though a knot of discomfort had already settled in my stomach. We continued our hike, but the carefree mood of earlier had vanished. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the underbrush had me jumping, my senses on high alert. Sarah stayed close, her usual enthusiasm replaced by nervous glances behind her. As we headed back to our campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I saw nothing but trees and shadows, yet the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each step. We reached our clearing just as the sun began to set, the sky painted in vibrant shades of orange and pink. But even the beautiful sunset couldn't shake the unease that had settled over us. "Maybe we should pack up and head back," Sarah suggested, as we started to prepare dinner. "I have a bad feeling about this place." I was tempted to agree, but my pride stopped me. "Let's stick it out for one more night," I said. "It's probably just our imaginations. We came out here for an adventure, remember?" Sarah nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. Honestly, I wasn't convinced either. As night fully descended, we huddled close to the fire, the flickering flames casting long, wavering shadows on the surrounding trees. We spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid of being overheard. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves had us on edge. It was just after midnight when we heard an eerie, long whistle followed by another call, this one from the opposite side of our clearing. Sarah grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling, "there's someone out there." Before I could respond, a figure stepped into the edge of our firelight, a tall, lean man with a scruffy beard and worn-out clothes. He was holding a hunting rifle. "Well," he said in a rough voice, "looks like we've got company, boys." As if on cue, more men emerged from the shadows. I counted 5 in total, each armed, and eyeing us with a mixture of curiosity and something far darker, more predatory. I stood up slowly, pulling Sarah with me. "We don't want any trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just camping. We'll pack up and leave right now, if you want us to." The first man, clearly in charge, let out a sinister laugh. "Oh, you're not going anywhere," he said, his voice dripping with menace. "You see, we've got ourselves a little operation here, and we can't have you two running off and telling anyone about it." My mind raced, trying to piece it together. What kind of operation were they running out here, in the middle of nowhere? Then it hit me: drugs. We must have wandered too close to their setup. "We haven't seen anything," Sarah said, her voice cracking with fear. "We don't even know where we are. Please, just let us go." The leader pretended to think it over for a moment before shaking his head. "Can't take that chance, sweetheart." "No, I'm afraid you're staying with us for a while." The other men closed in, tightening their circle around us. I frantically searched for an escape route, but we were completely surrounded. That's when I noticed a flash of metal in the firelight. One of the men was holding a rope. Instinct kicked in. I grabbed a burning log from the fire and hurled it at the closest man. He screamed in pain, the embers searing his chest, and in that moment, I shouted at Sarah, "Run!" I pushed her toward the shadows of the forest, and we bolted. We crashed through the underbrush, our hearts pounding so hard I thought they might burst. Behind us, I could hear their angry shouts and their footsteps drawing nearer. We had no idea where we were going, but we had to put as much distance as possible between us and those men. Sarah tripped, but I caught her before she hit the ground. "Keep going," I gasped, pulling her along. "We can't stop." The sounds of pursuit were getting closer. Those men knew these woods far better than we did, and they were gaining on us. Just when I thought we couldn't run any further, we broke through the trees and found ourselves at the edge of a steep ravine. The stream we had camped near had carved a deep gully into the earth, and the water was now a rushing torrent far below us. "What do we do?" Sarah cried, her eyes wide with terror. I looked back at the forest, seeing the flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. They were almost upon us. "We have to jump," I said, pointing across the ravine. It wasn't too wide, maybe 10 feet across. We could make it. We had to make it. Sarah stared at me as if I were out of my mind, but the sound of voices closing in made up her mind. She nodded, and I squeezed her hand. "On 3, I said. 1, 2, 3. Together, we leaped. For a heart-stopping moment, we were suspended in mid-air, the roar of the water below drowning out everything else. Then we hit the other side, rolling to break our fall. A sharp pain shot through my ankle, but adrenaline kept me moving. I yanked Sarah to her feet, and we stumbled into the trees for cover. Behind us, I heard the frustrated shouts of the men. They had reached the ravine, but it had bought us a few precious moments. We kept running, our bodies aching from exhaustion. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear and frantic flight. Every rustling leaf had us freezing, certain we'd been found. When the first light of dawn began to creep through the trees, we heard at the distant hum of traffic. We had made it to a road. Stumbling out of the forest, we flagged down the first vehicle we saw, an old pickup truck driven by an elderly farmer. The shock on his face when he saw us dirty, bleeding, and wild-eyed must have been something. We told him our story in a breathless rush, and he took us straight to the nearest police station. The authorities took our statements and launched a search, but they never found any trace of the men or their operation. Maybe they'd packed up and fled, knowing the law would be coming for them. It took a long time for us to shake the fear that still clung to us after that night. The nightmares still haven't stopped, and the feeling of safety hasn't fully returned. Sarah and I are still together, stronger for having survived that night, but we haven't gone camping since. Some scars go deeper than others, and some fears are too primal to shake off completely. Sometimes when I lie awake at night, I can still hear those eerie whistles cutting through the trees. I still feel the dread of being hunted, and I can't help but wonder about those dark forests, about the secrets they hold, waiting for the next unsuspecting campers looking for a peaceful retreat. The highway seemed to stretch on forever, a ribbon of asphalt winding through the night. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony broken only by the occasional flicker of my headlights catching a road sign or the eyes of some startled animal. I never imagined that picking up a stranger would turn a routine haul into a nightmare. But that's exactly what happened on that moonless night, out in the middle of nowhere. I'm Jack, a long-haul trucker, and I've been on the road for nearly 2 decades. I've seen plenty of strange things during my time on the highway, but nothing could have prepared me for what was about to unfold. It was just after midnight, and I was hauling a load of electronics from Chicago to Phoenix. The radio played softly in the background some late-night talk show about alien abductions. I laughed to myself, thinking how some people will believe anything to spice up their lives. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb out, hoping for a ride. Normally, I wouldn't pick up hitchhikers to many horror stories, too many risks. But something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was the late hour, the fact we were miles from nowhere. Or maybe I was just tired of the silence. I pulled over, the truck's air brakes hissing as it came to a stop. The man jogged up to the passenger side, and I leaned over to open the door. "Where are you headed?" I asked as he climbed in. "West," he replied shortly. "As far as you're going." I gave him a quick glance as he settled into the seat. He was younger than me, probably in his early 30s, lean, with close-cropped hair and intense eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. He carried a small duffel bag, clutching it tightly in his lap. "I'm Jack," I said, starting up the truck again. "Mike," he replied, not even offering a handshake. We drove in silence, the engine's rumble, and the whisper of tires on asphalt filling the air. I tried making conversation, asked where he was from, what he did for a living, but Mike's answers were short, distant, evasive. After a while, I gave up and focused on the road. About an hour later, I started to notice something off. Mike was fidgeting constantly, checking the side mirrors every few seconds. At first, I thought he was just nervous about hitching a ride, but then I caught him glancing at me, his eyes sharp, calculating. A chill ran down my spine. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Fine," he said too quickly. "Just not used to being in a truck this big." I nodded, but something in my gut told me it wasn't just nerves. My instincts, honed from years on the road, were screaming that something was wrong. Passing through a particularly desolate stretch of highway when Mike suddenly spoke up. "Pull over," he said, his voice tight. "What?" I asked, confused. "Pull over now." I glanced over at him, and my blood ran cold. He had a gun, pointed directly at me. My mind raced. Was this a robbery? Was he going to kill me and take the truck? I thought about my wife. My kids, would I ever see them again? "Look, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you want money, I've got some cash in my wallet. Just take it and go. No need to make this ugly." Mike's laugh was harsh, humorless. "This isn't about money, Jack. This is about survival. Now pull over, or I'll redecorate your cab with your brains." I did as he demanded, guiding the truck to the side of the road, heart hammering in my chest. The truck screeched to a halt on the shoulder, and before I could process what was happening, Mike was already moving. He reached over, snatched the keys. Gun in his hand left no room for negotiation. My legs trembled as I climbed out, my heart hammering in my chest. Mike followed, keeping the weapon steady and his gaze sharp. "What do you want?" I asked, hating the quiver in my voice. "I need your truck," he said flatly, "and you're going to drive it. You'll find out when we get there. Now get back in. You're driving." Reluctantly, I slid back into the driver's seat, my mind racing for a way out. Should I swerve recklessly to catch the attention of the highway patrol? Maybe distract him long enough to grab the gun? As if reading my thoughts, Mike warned, "Don't try anything stupid, Jack. I've got nothing to lose, and that means you've got everything to lose. Just drive." I obeyed, the hours stretching out as the scenery shifted to endless plains under a fading night sky. Mike's eyes darted between me and the road behind us, the gun unwavering in his grip. I couldn't help myself. "Who are you running from?" I asked. I thought he wouldn't answer, but then he muttered, "Bad people. People who want me dead." Why? His laugh was cold and bitter. "Because I know things. Things they don't want anyone to know." Was he a whistleblower? A man on the run from a dangerous secret? Whatever the truth, I was now tangled in his mess. Broke, painting the horizon in hues of pink and gold. Mike tensed. His focus shifted to the side mirror. "They're here," he muttered. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and saw a black SUV speeding toward us. Mike commanded, his knuckles white around the gun. I floored it, the engine roaring in protest, but the SUV was gaining fast. It pulled alongside us, and the passenger window rolled down. Down. Mike shouted just as gunfire erupted. I ducked instinctively, the truck swerving as bullets struck the metal. Mike leaned out the window, firing back. The confined cab roared with gunshots and the deafening crash of bullets ricocheting. Suddenly, the truck jolted violently. They'd shot out a tire. I gripped the steering wheel, desperate to keep control. The rest stopped. Mike yelled, pointing ahead. I spotted the exit and wrestled the truck into the parking lot, its blown tire sending us skidding to a stop. Run, Mike shouted, leaping from the cab. I didn't hesitate. I bolted, my legs fueled by pure adrenaline. Behind us, car doors slammed, and angry shouts rang out. Mike and I sprinted toward the rest stop, a cluster of small buildings still shrouded in early morning stillness. We burst into the main building, startling a bleary-eyed attendant. "Call the police," I gasped. Men with guns. Before I could finish, the door flew open again. 3 armed men stormed in. The attendant screamed and dove behind the counter as chaos erupted. Mike shoved me behind a snack rack and opened fire. The intruders shot back, their bullets shredding shelves and sending bags of chips raining down like confetti. The air was thick with gunpowder and fear. I crouched, my pulse thundering in my ears, wondering how my night had turned into this nightmare. The gunfight raged on, each second feeling like an eternity, until finally it all went quiet. "It doesn't look like something I can fix out here," he said, his tone apologetic. My stomach dropped. "Do you have a phone I could borrow?" "Mine's not getting any service," I asked, hoping for a lifeline. He shook his head. "Sorry, I don't believe in those gadgets, but I can give you a lift to town. There's a mechanic there who should be able to help." Every instinct in me screamed to stay put, but I was stuck. I couldn't stay out here all night, and the chances of another car passing by seemed slim. Hesitantly, I heard myself reply, "That would be great. Thanks." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Name's Tom," he said as he opened the passenger door. "Emily," I replied, grabbing my purse and climbing in. As we drove, Tom kept the conversation flowing. He asked where I was from, where I was headed. I kept my answers vague. Something about him put me on edge, though I couldn't pinpoint why. We had been driving for at least 20 minutes when I started to notice the lack of streetlights or buildings. There was nothing outside the windows but darkness. "How much farther is it to town?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. Tom glanced at me, and this time the chill in his expression was unmistakable. "Oh, we're not going to town, Emily." Panic gripped me. "What do you mean? Where are we going?" He didn't answer. His foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, and the truck surged forward. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. My heart sank as I realized the doors were locked. "Please," I begged, my voice trembling. "Just let me out. I won't tell anyone, I swear." Tom let out a low, humorless laugh. "Oh, I know you won't tell anyone. No one ever does." The weight of his words hit me like a sledgehammer. How many others had been in this same situation? How many had trusted his offer of help, only to disappear? My mind raced for a way out. I considered grabbing the wheel, but at this speed, we'd both be dead. Pleading clearly wasn't going to work. Tom broke the silence, his voice chillingly calm. "You know, Emily, you really shouldn't trust strangers. Bad things tend to happen to girls who aren't careful. But don't worry. It'll all be over soon." Tears threatened to spill, but I swallowed them back. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. Suddenly, an idea came to me, desperate and dangerous, but better than doing nothing. I started coughing violently, doubling over in my seat. "What the hell?" Tom snapped, glancing at me. I kept coughing, wheezing for breath. "I can't breathe," I gasped. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. "Hey, stop that," he barked, though his voice carried a note of concern. I slumped against the seat, letting my head fall limp as I gasped weakly. "Emily," Tom muttered, his grip on the wheel faltering. The truck began to slow as he pulled over. I felt it roll to a stop, and he threw it in park. "Hey," he said, leaning over and shaking my shoulder. "Wake up." This was my moment. My eyes snapped open, and I slammed my elbow into his face with every ounce of strength I had. There was a sickening crunch as his nose broke, and he howled in pain. While he was reeling, I lunged for the keys in the ignition. Yanking them free, I fumbled for the door lock. My fingers finally found it, but as I pushed the door open, Tom recovered. He grabbed me by the hair, yanking me back. I screamed, fueled more by fury than fear, and twisted in his grip with every ounce of strength I had. My free hand instinctively found his face, and I drove my fingers into his eyes with all my might. He let out a guttural scream, releasing me in his agony. I fell out of the truck, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through my body, but adrenaline surged, drowning out everything else. I scrambled to my feet and bolted into the night. Behind me, I could hear Tom shouting, stumbling as he tried to follow. But I had the upper hand now. My eyes had adjusted to the dark, and I was faster, younger. Fueled by sheer terror, I ran harder than I ever thought possible, my lungs burning and legs aching, but I refused to stop. The keys were still clutched tightly in my hand, the metal edges biting into my palm. I didn't dare look back, focusing only on putting as much distance as possible between us. Time became meaningless as I sprinted through the emptiness of the night. Minutes, hours, it didn't matter. I ran until the sound of Tom's pursuit faded into silence. But even when I couldn't hear him anymore, I didn't stop. Every rustle in the grass, every snap of a twig, every distant animal call sent my heart racing. To my panicked mind, they were all signs of Tom, closing in for the kill. Then, in the distance, I saw it. Lights. A faint glowing promise of safety. My heart leaped. Civilization. Salvation. Drawing on reserves of energy I didn't know I had, I sprinted toward the lights. As I drew closer, the shape of a small gas station emerged alone. Fluorescent lit sanctuary in the dark. I burst through the door, startling the clerk behind the counter, who had been half asleep. "Please," I gasped, my voice breaking. "Call the police. There's a man. He tried to." My words faltered as the adrenaline drained away, leaving me trembling and weak. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, overwhelmed by the night's events. The clerk, to his credit, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the phone and dialed 911, his eyes darting nervously toward the door as if expecting Tom to burst in. It didn't take long for the police to arrive. The sight of their flashing lights felt like salvation. I recounted everything, describing Tom and his truck in painstaking detail. They listened intently, and within hours, they found him stranded on the roadside, trying to fix his truck. The keys I had taken were still clenched in my hand, the only set he had. That slip-up was his undoing. When they searched his vehicle, they uncovered evidence tying him to several unsolved disappearances in the area. As for me, I survived. My injuries were minor, a few cuts and bruises, but the emotional toll was far greater. For months, I couldn't drive at night without feeling a surge of panic. Every truck that passed me on the highway made my pulse race. But I outsmarted a predator. I fought back and made it out alive. If sharing my story can help someone else trust their instincts and stay cautious, then maybe something good came from the terrifying night. Sometimes I find myself driving along that stretch of highway again. When I pass the spot where my car broke down, I send a silent thank you to whatever unseen force was watching over me and to the strength I found within myself when I needed it most. The decrepit shell of the Millbrook factory rose before us, its shattered windows glaring like empty eyes. My friends and I were thrill seekers, urban explorers in search of the perfect photo op. But we had no idea we were stepping into a waking nightmare that would test our courage and change us forever. I'm Jake, and I've always been drawn to the eerie beauty of abandoned places. There's something hauntingly poetic about buildings left to rot, slowly being reclaimed by nature. So, when we heard about the old Millbrook factory on the edge of town, it seemed like the perfect adventure. That day, our group was 5 strong. Me, my best friend Tom, his girlfriend Sarah, and our friends Mike and Lizzie. We'd done this kind of thing before, but this place was different, bigger, more isolated, and infinitely more unsettling. Excitement warred with unease as we approached the property. The chain link fence surrounding it was rusted and sagging, easy enough to slip through. One by one, we ducked under, unaware that we were leaving safety behind. We crunched across the shattered remnants of the parking lot, each step stirring the stillness of the night. Gravel and broken glass crunched underfoot, the sound unnervingly loud. "This place is seriously creepy," Lizzie whispered, her camera already in hand, snapping pictures of the decaying surroundings. "That's why we're here, right?" Mike joked, though his uneasy glance toward the looming structure betrayed his nerves. A rusted side door hung loosely from its hinges, creaking ominously in the breeze. We slipped through one by one, the stale, musty air inside thick with years of neglect. Shafts of sunlight pierced through holes in the roof, illuminating swirling clouds of dust that danced in the dim light. "Let's split up," Tom suggested, his voice bouncing off the crumbling walls. I wasn't thrilled by the idea, but the others seemed excited. We agreed to meet back at the entrance in an hour and went our separate ways. I wandered deeper into the labyrinthine halls of the factory, my flashlight carving through the gloom. The place was a graveyard of rusted machinery and collapsed beams. My footsteps echoed, unnervingly loud, and more than once, I startled myself by catching my reflection in grime-covered glass. I had just entered what seemed to be an office area when I heard a noise. Heavy, deliberate movement. Too large to be an animal. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Guys," I called out, my voice trembling. Silence answered me. As I slowly turned, sweeping my flashlight across the room, something caught my eye, a shadow darting past a distant doorway. Too big to be any of my friends. Fear prickled at my skin, but curiosity pushed me forward. I moved toward the doorway, every nerve on edge. Just as I reached the threshold, I heard them voices. Low and rough, speaking in tones that didn't belong to my friends. Peeking around the corner, my stomach dropped. On the main factory floor, 3 men stood clustered around a stack of crates, passing packages between them. The scene was unmistakable. A drug deal. I must have made a noise, a gasp, or the scrape of my shoe, because one of the men snapped his head toward me. Our eyes locked. "Hey!" he shouted, reaching for his waistband. I didn't wait to find out what he was grabbing. Spinning on my heel, I bolted, panic surging through me. Behind me, I heard the men shouting and the heavy thud of their boots chasing me down. Turning a corner at full speed, I slammed straight into Tom. We both went sprawling. "Jake, what the hell?" Tom groaned, rubbing his head. "No time," I panted, scrambling up. "We have to get out of here. Now." His expression hardened, and he nodded. "Sarah's just down the hall. I don't know where Mike and Lizzie are." We found Sarah quickly, and I explained the danger as fast as I could. Fear flickered in her eyes, but she kept her composure. "We need to find Mike and Lizzie," she insisted. Before we could move, a scream tore through the air. "Lizzie!" We ran toward the sound, caution forgotten in our urgency. Bursting into a cavernous room, we found Lizzie backed into a corner, one of the men advancing on her. Mike lay unconscious on the floor. Without thinking, I grabbed a rusted pipe from the ground and charged. I swung with everything I had, striking the man in the shoulder. He crumpled with a howl. "Run!" I shouted at Lizzie. She didn't hesitate, darting toward Sarah. Tom crouched beside Mike, checking his pulse. "He's alive," he said, relief flooding his voice. "Just knocked out." The man I'd hit struggled to his feet, rage burning in his eyes. Behind him, his two companions stormed into the room. "You kids picked the wrong place to play," one of them growled. We were trapped, the only exit blocked by the men. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. That's when I saw a conveyor belt leading to an upper level. "The belt," I whispered to Tom. "We need to get up there." He nodded. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. We moved as one, hauling Mike between us as we sprinted for the conveyor belt. Lizzie and Sarah followed close behind. The men, caught off guard, hesitated for a crucial moment. Scrambling up the conveyor belt, its jagged edges slicing our hands, we reached the upper level. A maze of catwalks stretched before us, swaying precariously with every step. "Which way?" Sarah asked, panic in her voice. "There," I pointed to a faded exit sign above a distant door. We raced across the creaking walkways, the men climbing up behind us. Reaching the door, I yanked it open to reveal a rusted fire escape. We didn't hesitate. Halfway down, a gunshot rang out, reverberating through the factory. "Keep moving," I yelled. We hit the ground running, not stopping until we reached Tom's car, parked blocks away. We piled in, Mike groggy but conscious, and sped off, leaving the factory and the nightmare behind. In the safety of the car, the reality hit us. I told the group what I'd seen, a drug deal gone wrong. We debated calling the police, but fear of retaliation kept us silent. That night changed us. The thrill of exploration turned to terror, and the memories haunted us for months. None of us ever set foot in an abandoned building again. The Millbrook factory still stands, its secrets hidden in the shadows. And every time I pass it, I shudder, remembering the day our curiosity nearly cost us our lives. I clocked in at PM, the usual time when the last of the overworked employees shuffled out, their exhaustion hanging in the air. Marguerite from accounting was the last to leave, her arms loaded with files she was clearly taking home. "Another late one, Marguerite?" I asked, holding the door open for her. "You know how tax season is, Carlos," she replied with a weary smile. "See you tomorrow." I didn't realize then that those words might be the last we'd ever share. I began my routine on the top floor, working my way down. Vacuum the floors, empty the trash, wipe down desks. It was monotonous, but it left my mind free to wander. I was mulling over a plot twist for my latest story when I heard it. A loud crash, followed by muffled cursing. I froze, hand gripping the vacuum's handle. The noise had come from a few floors below, maybe the third or fourth. My first thought was that Marguerite had come back for something, but the voice didn't match her calm demeanor. Cautiously, I made my way to the stairwell. The emergency lights cast eerie shadows as I descended, my heartbeat growing louder with every step. On the fourth floor landing, I heard voices low, urgent whispers that didn't belong to anyone who should have been in the building. Pushing the door open just a crack, I peered into the dark office space. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. 3 men dressed in black, methodically searching desks and cabinets. One held a flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness as they rifled through the space with precision. Burglars. And I was the only one in the building. Quietly, I shut the door. My first instinct was to call the police, but my phone was locked in my locker in the basement. The office phones wouldn't work. The system shut down after hours. My only hope was the security office on the ground floor. It had a separate phone line. I crept down the stairs, my movements as silent as I could manage. Just as I reached the 3rd floor, the stairwell door above creaked open. "Check this floor," one of them ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. My pulse quickened as their footsteps grew louder. I slipped through the 3rd floor door and ducked into the nearest hiding spot, a supply closet. Closing the door as softly as I could, I pressed myself against the back wall, surrounded by the sharp scent of cleaning supplies. Through the slats in the door, I saw the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness outside. "Nothing here," one of them growled after what felt like an eternity. I held my breath, waiting for their voices and footsteps to fade before daring to move. My heart raced as I eased the closet door open and slipped back into the office. I had to get to the security office fast. I made it to the stairwell, but the moment I stepped inside, a shout echoed from above. "There's someone down there." Panic surged through me as I bolted down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. Their footsteps thundered behind me, closing the distance. Bursting into the lobby, I spotted the security office across the atrium. I was halfway there when one of them stepped out of the shadows. He lunged at me, but years of navigating office spaces with my cleaning cart had made me quick. I ducked under his grasp and sprinted toward the maintenance door near the elevators. The elevators were useless at night, but behind the maintenance door was a ladder leading to the roof. I yanked the door open and began climbing, my arms burning as I hauled myself upward. Below me, I heard the door slam open again. The cool night air hit me as I pushed through the roof access hatch, pulling myself onto the gravel surface. Stars sparkled overhead, indifferent to the chaos unfolding below. I ran to the edge of the roof, searching desperately for a way down. There was none. The hatch banged open again, and the men emerged, their faces set with anger. Nowhere to run, one sneered, stepping closer. I backed up until I felt the edge of the roof against my legs. "I don't know who you are or what you want," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I won't tell anyone, just let me go." The man laughed coldly. "Can't take that risk." He lunged, and in a split-second decision, I vaulted over the ledge. For a heart-stopping moment, I was in free fall before landing hard on the window-washing platform below. Shouts erupted from above as I scrambled for the controls. The platform lurched downward, but I wasn't safe yet. A shot rang out, the bullet pinging off the metal. Another shattered one of the support cables, causing the platform to tilt dangerously. Through the chaos, I spotted an open window a few stories below. Timing the swing of the platform, I leapt, my hands catching the sill just in time. Pain shot through my arms as I pulled myself inside, collapsing onto the floor. There was no time to rest. The men were already descending. I ran for the elevators, prying open the doors to reach the emergency phone. 911. What's your emergency? Relief flooded me as I explained the situation. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Minutes later, the police arrived, cornering the men as they tried to flee. Sitting in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, I watched them being led away in cuffs. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, glanced back at me with a look that chilled me to the core. I gave my statement to the officers and went home to my family, hugging them tighter than ever. I don't work nights anymore. The company offered me a day shift, a small consolation for the night I'll never forget.